Greetings, everyone. I want to welcome you. This is the very first podcast of The Reluctant Messenger Unleashed. So, Donna, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Donna Rebido, and I'm host of the Exploring Consciousness podcast.
Let's see it. Oh, woohoo! There it is. Love it.
I'm a sports medicine acupuncturist, a retired college professor, and student of the Monroe Institute in Favre, Virginia. I met Candy in a virtual meeting room for the Monroe Institute for those leading local chapters. As we were talking, Candy mentioned that she recently had a book published called The Reluctant Messenger, Tales from Beyond Belief. I was intrigued by the title, so I ordered a copy and began a conversation with Candy while waiting for the book to arrive. Once it did, I couldn't put it down. I began highlighting so many passages in books that I was highlighting so many passages and pages that my book began to look yellow, like a college student's book.
I remember those days.
Remember that?
Oh, yes. We all carried those yellow books.
Yes, I have. It's totally yellow and circled. And well, once I had it, I couldn't put it down. I asked her to be a guest on my podcast, and Candace said yes. What's interesting, when I was generating some questions to ask her on my podcast, a thought came into my mind. And when that happens to me, when a thought comes in, like from the top, I know it's from my guides. It said, I should suggest to Candy that we do a YouTube video series that would really explore the book and its powerful passages and messages. The book is so rich that I didn't feel like I could do justice with it with a 30 to 40 minute podcast. Candace said it was a great idea. She got Candace cold chills.
Yes.
And the Reluctant Messenger Unleashed was born, and here we are.
Oh my gosh, Donna, I remember when you did this. First of all, I remember when you invited me as a guest on your podcast. I thought that's wonderful. But what I really didn't expect or anticipate is as we started connecting, we realized how connected we were. It's like I've known you my entire life.
I thought we were twins.
I was just going to say, I have a twin sister, but I discovered a new twin with you, which was great. But let me introduce myself to everyone out there. My name is Candace Sanderson, and I am just so honored and excited to be on this new venture. I still remember on the podcast when you mentioned something about a YouTube channel we could do together. I got these cold chills. And, that has always been a huge validation for me that I really need to pay attention. I really need to focus on what's going on because something is, really requires my attention. But what also happened when you said that is I had a vision. It was very fast. And, years ago, I didn't used to visualize things, but now I can. And these visions will pop into my mind and they're almost gone before I realize it. But I can actually move back. I know this sounds weird, but I can move back and take a look at the vision. I can like freeze frame it and then see it. So what happened while I'm having these cold chills about let's do a podcast, when you said The Reluctant Messenger Unleashed, I had this vision. I was from a bird's eye view, and there was this huge field, and there was a dog, like a dog you would use in hunting. I think it was an English pointer, and I saw someone unleash this dog in this remote field. And the dog just tore off in the distance. It's running here, running there, sniffing, digging, just having so much fun in this new environment. It's like he had to investigate the source of all these delicious smells. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to investigate. We're going to unleash the messages from the book and dig deeper into meaning and purpose. Yeah, as a brief introduction, I retired as a psychologist several years ago. And then I discovered that, well, even before I retired, but I discovered there's more to life than meets the eye. With my background as being a psychologist, I was just steeped in the scientific method. If you couldn't measure it with the physical senses, Donna, it didn't exist. Not in my world. But boy, did I learn. I had a lot to learn. My entire belief system crumbled beneath me one morning early in 2013. And I had to confront the unknown, this world of spirit. And that, my life changed in that 10-minute period of time. And that's what brought The Reluctant Messenger, the book, into fruition. But when we first met, Donna, once we connected and you talked about me maybe coming on your podcast, you read the book, and because we were on social media, you started texting me or messaging me, and you were saying, "Ooh, page 17. Ooh, page 22. Ooh, page 28." And so I had to get my book out and see what it was. And I realized that the book really did speak to you.
Oh
So
my gosh.
I'm so happy.
And it's true. I just, and I had to stop typing because my hand was getting cramped. I was like, exactly what Candace said. And that's why it's all in yellow. Yeah.
So, where would you like to go from here? I thought what we would do on the first episode is go through the introduction because
Yes. So, readers, if you take out your book, because in the podcast I said you need to go get the book and that we were going to do this. So, we're going to go through the introduction. Now, what intrigued me in the beginning about Candace was that when I'm doing my podcast on exploring consciousness, I'm looking for real people. And what I mean by that is people that perhaps are unexpected or very believable, which is why I do my podcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because I take two podcasts to set the stage to let people know how believable these people are. So when I was reading about your background, being you're just going through life, and it's not, you're not claiming to have had a lot of spirituality and
right,
a
not
lot
at
of, a lot of woo woo, and that you said that you were a school psychologist. Now, as a college professor, one of the disciplines that I teach in is psychology. So again, anything that kind of piqued my interest too, and I said, oh my gosh. And really kind of delved into that. So my question, even though we spent a lot of time, we spent some time on this in the podcast because we don't know who's coming, I would like to ask you the question of, like you had just said about being a scientist. I'm a scientist. If it's not alert, when you first met, there's two parts of me, 13, and that is, you're driving to school and you hear this message and you're like, oh man, I don't use that vocabulary. I wonder what that was. And you could have easily dismissed it.
And initially, I did dismiss it.
Mm-hmm.
I receive a message, and it's so clear because of the phrasing and the vocabulary. It was so clear, Donna, that it wasn't from me. It was like a message for me. And I didn't know what to think about it. So I did. It's like, I dismissed it. I mean, in psychology, we call that denial. When we're confronted and it felt like a confrontation with new information, we don't have anything to go on. There's no file. There aren't any files in my brain that says, oh, that's what this is. This is how you deal with it. You're like operating in the dark. And it was a little uncomfortable. I mean, the first thing I thought is, have I gone crazy? I'm going through the DSM-5 in my mind. It's like, okay, am I psychotic?
Am I psychotic? Is this, am I hearing things?
And
Are
but
they
then,
telling me to do something?
but I realized, I'm oriented to time, place, and person. I don't know what this is. Maybe it's just one of those tales I've heard about, but just I just dismissed it. But
So, yeah, I was going to say the next part of it was I wanted to know what you kind of went through, and you just answered that. Then you get out of the car. So I'm
Right.
thinking
Right.
that, I try to put myself in your place. So I'd be doing the same thing. Like, what? What the heck is
What is
that?
this?
What is that? But when you got out and you had that mystical experience, I wonder if in the meantime, did your guides ever say anything back to you about, you know, we had to send you this mystical experience
Actually,
because we knew you were dismissing us. That's
actually, that is so true. Years later,
yeah,
I heard from them, and it's like I must have been so dense to them. They gave me this beautiful message. And for those who haven't read it, let me just share real
yeah.
quick.
Let's do that message and then
It was a message about a flower, and that a flower is a flower. So hyphenating the word
hyphenate.
a flower of energy. And as a plant reaches down into Mother Earth, and then reaches straight up to Father Sky, it's perfect alignment with Source. And what happens is it produces this beautiful flower. And then the message said, humans too are like these flowers of energy. If you remain grounded and all that good stuff, then you're open to all this wonderful potential. I mean, that was a beautiful message. It, in retrospect, was life altering. But in real time, I didn't know what to deal with it. So it's like, oh, I don't know. Oh, forget that. I've got to get to work an hour early.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, since then, I know what happened. It's like the messengers, I don't know that they really were disappointed. That's probably
No, 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 no.
my feeling of them,
Yeah.
but they knew they had not reached me. And I can just kind of see in my mind's eye this background. They're saying, what do we do now? What do we do
Yeah,
now? They'll
exactly.
say, bring in the tree, bring in the tree. And you know what? That's exactly what they did. I'm getting out of my car, going to work, going to unlock the door, my coffee in my hand, and all of a sudden I stop. I am called to this beautiful Royal Poinciana tree. Now, that's a subtropical tree. It's got this huge trunk, gnarly trunk, and it's got these beautiful, wide spreading branches that curve upward. And it just created this canopy of blossoms that the flower of a royal poinciana looks like an orchid. So it's just filled with red, orange blossoms. And the sun is now just starting to rise because this was before sunrise. And light starts filtering in through these leaves. And I'm looking on the ground, and there's this absolute mesmerizing pattern from the sun. And I'm there with my mouth, I'm sure, dropped open. And I realized this tree. Now, first of all, this tree I had passed hundreds of
Yeah,
times
yeah.
before. This tree called me to it. And it was as much alive, Donna, as I was. So the first time in my life, I realized this tree is a sentient being. And I am just there mesmerized. My attention's called to this tiny
Yeah.
bud that had not opened. It had not flowered. And I've got cold chills right now, but the message returned to me. I had just dismissed this message about a flower being a flower of energy. And it all came back to me. And I realized that's why I was called to this tree. I had to pay attention to this message because this message was about me. It was about you. It was about everyone. We are all flowers. We are flowers of energy just waiting to blossom. So once this experience was over, now I don't know how long it lasted because, and we mentioned this on the podcast, time stands still. I was operating in a space where time no longer existed. I felt like I was there for years. But when it ended and I walked into the building, I had no idea how this would change me. I hadn't realized, I had not yet realized I had just taken my first steps into the world of spirit. And this was the beginning of my tale as a reluctant messenger. It was
So
life altering.
it was life altering because you you now have two experiences. So you were dismissing the first one, and it's really, really difficult to dismiss a mystical experience
I
because
couldn't. It was,
you're fully involved in it, and you actually have a sense of time stopping, in that it's almost like that's all that exists. This
yes,
moment, and there's nothing else going on around it, and so it's like this immersion. Now, my question for you is, and I think people would want to know, okay, so you've had your life, you're driving to work, you hear the message, but you get out, but you have a mystical experience. But you now have to go into work.
yes, yes.
So I got to tell you, Candy, if it was me, I don't know what I would do. But it also, what happens next, your life really tells people who you are. It's really a great example of why they picked you. So you now have to go to work. What happened that day?
Well, it's interesting. I had a two life altering experiences, but I didn't even get it. I didn't realize it. I knew when I walked in the building that something special had happened, but I had no idea of its real impact on me. But my training as a psychologist kicked in, and my training was observe, document. So I went straight to my office. I unlocked the door. I mean, I still remember it. I had
Yeah.
my purse, the long strap of my purse on my left shoulder. I sat down at my desk, turned on that old clunky, desktop computer, and I started documenting. I had to write every single thought, word, and feeling that occurred. I didn't really know what it meant, but I knew it meant something and I had to document it. Now, the rest of my day was back to back meetings. I didn't have any time to really process this. I would only have like 2 or 3 minutes between meetings, but I couldn't get it out of the back of my mind. But you know what? By the end of the day, it was starting to settle in. And I was starting to realize, this is pretty awesome. And then I wondered, is this it? Is this
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
once in a lifetime event that will define me forever? Or would I be lucky enough to have more messages? I
And
was lucky.
in the Exploring Consciousness podcast, I want, I'd like those listeners, and hopefully the listeners come over here, to realize who the other side is picking. So they're picking a lot of scientists. So they're picking people with certain skills. And so I know you, Candy, and you would say, I don't know why they picked me. I'm an ordinary person. But you just told us the skills they were looking for. They're looking for someone who's open,
Right?
skeptical, can observe, can document. That's the definition of a scientist. So we're setting this groundwork because her book is Tales from Beyond Belief, and so when people, human beings, hear things for the first time, they immediately, first thing, is this true or not true? How
Right.
can I believe this? And so that becomes a really crucial question. We're laying this groundwork to say, you still can believe or not believe. However, if you're an open skeptic, if you're someone that has a logical mind and you hear what we're saying and you see this background, that when we start unpacking the messages, it's believable, even though what we're saying is unbelievable. It's beyond
Exactly.
belief.
And
But
Donna,
he's not making it up.
right. During our podcast, you mentioned something about, oh, but you were the logical person because of
Yes, I
your
did.
background. And then I realized, you're right. I never really thought of it until then. And for those people who maybe haven't seen or haven't listened to your podcast, we're going to have links to your podcast below. So people watching this on YouTube can connect with that. But once you said that, I realized, first it's counterintuitive. My training, steep in the, scientific method, how could that make me open to spiritual experiences? Well, it did, because when we do, I remember an experimental design class that we had in graduate school where we were actually running mice, actually they were rats, through a maze. And we had to come up with a hypothesis or more than one hypothesis. What did we think what would happen? And we learned to observe everything. You know, did we run the rat during the maze the same time every day? Was the temperature the same in the room? What was the humidity like? How about the diet? Had the rat changed diets? If so, what was it? And we learned to sit back, observe absolutely everything. Now, we didn't hope for a result. We waited till the results happened, and then we analyzed it. And this is exactly what happened to me. I was open, I allowed the energy to flow, and only after the fact did I analyze it. And after a while, I had had hundreds of messages. Some of them I could verify, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, look at this. I mean, my first thought was, why wouldn't, and it does happen with, someone who's very spiritual, or they meditate all the time. I could see them opening up to this beautiful world that I had entered. But it's like, but why me? I'm a psychologist. I'm trained to believe only what my five physical senses could measure. If they couldn't be, if I couldn't smell it, see it, hear it, or taste it, it didn't exist. But then, as you pointed out, that's the reason they came to me. I have a story that is believable because I was skeptical about it. I just collected the data, and we let the data drive the results.
And what's also interesting too is that as a scientist, you go verify the facts. So you just don't, it's not just an interpretation. It's, okay, this happened, they said this. Okay, I observed it, I documented. There's another step, and that's verification. And you do that. So
Yeah.
people got to understand when we break open these messages, keep all of this in mind, that this is who this is. So I want to go on with couple of thoughts, and on the podcast, we told your story. We about happened. For me, for this right now, because trading on the is what happened next. So you go through the day, you wrote it down, and you were at that point saying, "Oh, that was that was fantastic. Will it happen again? When did it happen again?"
It was a week or so later. All of a sudden, driving to work again, I got a message from a friend of mine who had passed away a couple of years before, Becky. She was a kindergarten teacher. And she came in with a message that said, Marie, one of our mutual friends, was going to have some kind of a health issue.
Yeah.
But tell her, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. And that was just amazing to me. And a little bit later, I got another message from someone who had passed away. Now, by this time, I realized the messengers were here to stay.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into a routine. I had my iPhone with me at all times. I would get in the car each morning. I would open up my recording device on my app, and I would hit record, and the messages, Donna, would just start flowing. Now, what I love about this, and I really wish I'd had it in graduate school, I had a spiritual spell check. Now, what I mean by that is when the messages started coming to me, they were like the message with the flower, so specific. I heard it word by word. Now, I didn't hear it with my physical ears,
Right, right.
but they came into my awareness with such specificity. It was as if I had heard it, but they would tell me when to, this is so,
No.
when to start a new paragraph. When I would end each sentence, they would say period or exclamation mark. If I made a mistake, just like dictation, they would say strike that, and they would give me the correct, wording. When I ran across words that I wasn't familiar with, I would see the word, how it was spelled, but I would hear how it was pronounced. So it was a perfect spell check. But
I
those
love
first few messages that came in were from people who had passed away.
So, folks, we're on in the introduction. We're on pages 8 and 9. So she's unpacking. We're taking a look at this next section where she's talking about these messages. If follow along on that.
Now, what I found trying to unpack some of these is, first of all, just the message that it was such an honor that I had, where I could share that with the people that needed to hear it. But in retrospect, and here we are digging in a little bit deeper,
Mhm.
these messages provided much more information than just the words that were shared. In fact, right now, I don't get a lot of messages from people who have passed away. This was an opportunity for me to step into the frequencies, the
Mm.
energy of the other side. I started learning about that dimension. Like, for example, with Becky, when Becky
Yeah.
told me, the kindergarten teacher who said that Marie was going to have a problem, I learned that when we pass away, we are still there watching out over our loved ones. We we are still there helping them, but on the other side, they have a greater perspective. They know more than we do, and they know what might come. So we've got this larger perspective. It's like, okay, that's great. Us The second messages that came in.
I'm gonna stop you before the
Okay,
second message because we're that bloodhound digging, and
okay,
so
good.
I want to dig a little bit more here, where to verify. So we're gonna do a verification. I had a near-death experience, and it's number 10, podcast number 10. But a lot of what I experienced, Candy was talking about in her books, which was another one that gave, I call it goosebumps or God bumps. She gets cold chills. And so, and having died and crossed over, that's exactly true. There's an energy of frequency, and you really see things from such a it's really quite different. And what happened to you is the guides took you to spiritual training school.
Yes,
So
yes.
this wasn't, she didn't just download this and boom, off to the races. She started as a medium, what we would call a medium. And she went in from that into a channeler, and now what you would call, why we're doing this, is a teacher. So she also is teaching this, but there's a timeline here. So we can unpack the timeline, or really what's important here is the skills. So why we're doing this is that you have to understand that they knew she was a scientist, so they started working on her spiritual skills. So she had the observable skills, but they're now training her. And the first thing that they did was, as a medium, you have evidence. It's called sacred mediumship or evidential mediumship. So it's, again, there's evidence and then verification. So I wanted to let people know that even when starting as a medium, you were having evidence.
Right, right. Um, you know, I started to know that there was a bigger picture to life. Now, I said no, not believe. I believed there was, but now I was beginning to know. And communicating with people who had passed away, and then I could verify a lot of this information. This told me that when we die, we continue. We're just as alive and connected as we were in the physical realm. We're just in another dimension. We never die. When it's our time to drop our physical forms, we can stay connected to those on the earth plane. We can help guide them. You know, another lesson I learned was with another person I mentioned in the book that I called John. He passed from his mid 30s. He had a degenerative disease. He had died like, I think, 18 months or so before. And he told me he had chosen that life. Now, he gave me messages that needed to be passed on, but he said, I chose this life. And then he showed me he was living in perfection. And I heard him say several times, all is good, all is good. And I, wrote that down. Okay. But then, and this was new for me because I wasn't a very visual person, I saw him in my mind's eye pick up a chisel and a hammer. And in a piece of granite, he wrote, it's all good. And I realized I misunderstood. Now, you might think there's not much difference between it's all good and all is good, but it is when it comes to verifying data like this. Now, there were several things I learned from John. One is the lesson of sacred contracts. Mm-hmm. He had chosen this life. So I learned that we plan our lives before we're born, before we cross what the messengers have told me is the veil of forgetfulness. You know, another lesson didn't surprise me. On the other side, there's this healing and perfection. But my views of the non-physical, those views were expanding. And I began to realize that this other part of us, the one that lives just in the physical body, when our body drops away, that other aspect, now, whether we call it soul or spirit, it doesn't matter, but that part never dies. It lives on forever.
So when I died, when I drowned, I was in a boating accident and drowned. And the steps I went through was, when I drowned, the moment I did and came out of myself, the veil was right there. And it felt like a very thin saran wrap. It's very, very thin, but I felt like I went through that. Mm-hmm. So when I went through that, and I realized, the next thing is I realized I was dead. Because you say, oh, I'm dead. Well, most people say that. There's some that don't, but most people say.
So how did you feel when you realized you were dead?
So I went, oh, I'm dead. My first thought was, like my family and friends are going to be really, sorry, it's my thyroid. My family and friends are going to be upset. The next thought was, where are they going to have the funeral? Are they going to have it in New York, where my family and friends are, or in Arizona, where I've been living for 30 years? So you kind of do
those important things.
Then I realized something really significant, and that's there's no time. I actually felt that. Even though I didn't have a body, when you first come out, you can, almost like when you do a Jell-O mold and it's ready and you flip it over and you take off the mold and you have that impression. That's what it felt like. You drop your body and there you're the mold for a little bit. And the next thing was, I brought my whole self with me. I'm here. I'm conscious. My whole consciousness is with me.
And you just said something so important. You said, I am here. Yes. That's so true. The real you, your essence.
Yeah, I was over there. And so every time you talk about the mediumship or the lessons or what you saw, I'm just verifying. It's exactly what happened. And it was like, okay.
And there's more than one way to get at this information. You had a near-death experience, and I'm so glad I didn't have to do that.
Yeah,
I
don't do
just
that.
was driving to work one day. But it's great though, because there are more and more people that are opening up to these kinds of experiences, and you don't have to have a near-death experience for that to happen. But that veil between the dimensions, that veil is thinning. And there's a reason for that, and we can get into that later. But it's beautiful once you've tasted the other side, once you've stepped into those absolute divine frequencies, you never forget it. So there's people like us, Donna, which is one reason why we're so connected, is that we still have that scientific background that we were trained in, and we're still really grounded sometimes in the third dimensional reality. But we've got that other foot on that other side, and we straddled this earth, being able to bring in those frequencies from both worlds in both dimensions. And that is so beautiful and so sacred. And I know this sounds so strange, but it's true. This is what happens, and I love it. I love it.
So I interrupted you talking about Dan, I think. Who was next?
Oh, well, that was John.
Oh, that was John, yeah.
But another lesson with John is the chisel and granite. That was a new skill set for me. I now began visions. I began seeing things. And even today, sometimes, and if you read my second book, which I usually have here to show,
yeah.
My second book, a lot of the messages are the visions themselves. But before this time, if I was not visual, if someone said, close your eyes and think of the Eiffel Tower, I would see nothing. Well, now that skill set was starting to develop with me. So the lessons I was getting from other people, they were acclimating me to this new world. Another group that came in, and I'm not talking about all the messages that I got. Some of them, when I talk about them, they bring me back into that energy frequency. And when that happens, I usually, start sobbing, because it's, I'm back where it happened. So some of these I've skipped, and you can read about them in the book. But the next one I want to talk about was a group of people that came in for my friend, Marilyn. Now, what was so interesting about Marilyn's group was it was her father, her mother, and her stepmother. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, multiple spouses. It's like, I'm not too sure I'm ready for this. But I guess they could tell I was a little uncomfortable. And so they volunteered that they had been traveling together for many lifetimes as souls on the same path. So here's a lesson for me. Soul groups, I didn't know about that. Traveling through multiple lives. Well, Donna, I believe in reincarnation. It's logical. It makes sense. But back then, I didn't. I grew up in what we called was the Bible Belt in Western Kentucky. I was raised as a Southern Baptist. We went to church every time the doors were open. We read from the Bible. And if there was any hint of reincarnation in the Bible, we skipped that part. So this was new information for me. So with each lesson that I was learning, I was learning more about our divine nature. What makes you, you, and me. But before that day, before this happened, I just went about my life just oblivious to my true nature. I'd go to work, put in 50 hours, each week. I'd come home each day, went to bed, went to sleep, rinse, repeat. I had no idea that I and you and everyone out there, that we had a greater purpose of why we're here on earth. I was oblivious to everything, unless it was right in front of my eyes. But I was beginning to get lessons from these people that had passed. Um, Marilyn's family, they completed each other's sentences. They laughed. And one lesson I learned was, you're a lot like you were here on the other side. Your sense of humor travels with you. But I learned about relationships. What was uncomfortable for me here, multiple spouses, was not uncomfortable for them at all. It was complex, I thought, but not for them. They let those things go, and they just experience life more fully than we did here. It was just it was a beautiful experience.
And it talks a lot about um, the evolution of who we are on the path now, and that I had the same situation where I went along. I grew up in a belief system, and that was it. And
That was it.
that was
Full
it.
stop.
Don't talk to me about it. And even though I had some spiritual experiences and some things happened, but not to the breadth and depth until I died.
Yeah.
And that just, and like I said, you can listen to it. But when I came back, snapped back into my body and realized, oh, I'm going to live, people asked, did that experience change you? Oh my gosh, it has to. You died, and you came back.
Right, right. So
So
what?
yeah, the contracts and the soul groupings and reincarnation, but they give it to you a little bit at a time. Some of it a little bit at a time. Others just like boom.
Right, right.
Yeah. So yeah, we're letting people know when we break this open, we're unleashing it to tell you that these are our experiences.
And the messenger started feeding it to me in a pretty big chunk when they said this flower thing, and they realized she's not getting it. I just dismissed it, denial. I don't want to pay attention to that.
So boom.
And then they dropped me into the field, into their field, with this mystical experience with the tree. And what happened with me, like it did with you when you died, is you are in their energy field, in their frequencies, and you change. You have to change. Growing up in my Judeo-Christian family, I didn't disbelieve a lot of things like your life, you live on after you die. I didn't disbelieve it, but I couldn't prove it. I didn't know whether it was really true. But once you've been there, done that, no longer a belief, it becomes a known. And that's what was happening with me. Message by message, I was walking further into that realm of theirs, and they were showing me. And what I realized after I had had these messages with people who had passed away, a lot of them I could verify, is remember that, Raiders of the Lost Ark? I was putting on my explorer's hat. I was, Indiana Jones, ready to step farther into those realms. I didn't really realize it at the time. I knew something had happened, but every day since then, I go a little bit farther. Now, I'm looking at your beautiful background that you have. You have this cosmic background, you know, um, with your green screen, unless you're really there. But
Kind
I,
of. I'm really there.
yeah, but I have been there too. I
Yeah.
have traveled through the cosmos on the tail of a comet. I've been a mite on the wing of a condor. I've dropped into a drop of rain that then soaked into the earth, where I ended up being within the core of the earth. And as strange and as bizarre as these things sound to people, they're real because we are a part of everything that is. And one day we will all know that, like Donna and I know that.
Yeah, so a lot of times people go, the people would ask me, how do you know that wasn't a product of your brain? And I think that they let me have that experience as a scientist in psychology, and we have to know neuroscience.
Right.
And so I said, well, that's a great question, and I can explain it to you in scientific terms, but a lot of times people won't know this till they know it.
Exactly.
So we understand that you could be listening to this and you could be one of those people, and you can dismiss it or you can really just listen, because we're opening the veil for you. We are giving you a glimpse of our experiences in the veil, and it's really kind of so you're not so surprised when you cross over
When it happens.
when it
But you know
happens.
what? Truth is something that's so interesting. I thought I knew truth before I started experiencing
Right.
these realms. And now my definition of truth has expanded greatly. Um, why didn't the messengers come to me years before? I have no idea, but I think I wasn't ready to hear truth. And some people watching this may not be ready either. That's okay. We're
It's okay.
not here to convince you.
Oh,
We're
no.
here to show you our experiences and
Mhm.
share them. And what I have found, I've had so many people contact me since I've written, both books, and they open up to me and share experiences that have happened to them that they've never told anyone about before. Both of us are fans of Monroe Institute, and Bob Monroe in his affirmations always says, I am more than my physical body. And that is so wise. If the only thing you take away from this is to realize we are more than just our three-dimensional physical selves, we are greater than our physical bodies. And as you learn to open up and see that, your life has that potential of being enriched.
Yeah, and that's really the purpose of this. So we've set the background. We've told you who we are, our purpose. We're not here to knock you over the head with this. We're just telling you. I think that you will find this very interesting. That there is information from the other side. You can assimilate it slowly. You can, and that would be good. We don't want you to be, oh,
Right.
there's two ends of the scale. One I totally disbelieve and I believe without thinking. Yeah, verify your sources. We're going to tell you some things that you can verify, and the more verification you get, the more you begin to assimilate, and then finally you come to a conclusion. Oh my God, I am more than physical. Oh my God, then this must be, if that's true, then this must be, oh, that must be true. And then before you know it, you're going to be doing a session with us.
Right, right. I know, but what's so beautiful about this is, things will unfold in the way it's meant to. It's like that flower, that flower of energy. When you are in perfect alignment, when you're grounded to, three-dimensional earth, but you've got your eyes set on your goal and learning more, when you are in perfect alignment, that bud will flower, that energy will flow. I used to see the world through the empirical lens of science, empirical stuff that you could measure. Now I see the world through the lens of energy. And energy is like, I like to think of it as water through a garden hose. If that hose is crimped, you're not going to get much information. But as you relax and you let that information flow, what happens is that garden hose uncrimps and energy starts to flow through. Our connection to the other side, that what the messengers have told me, is through a portal. And that portal is our heart. So as you listen to the information that we're sharing, um, use your brain. That's important. I'm a psychologist. I was over analyzing everything, but don't discount the wisdom from the heart. Don't always have your information and your energy in your headspace. Bring it down to your heart, into your gut. What does your heart say? What does your heart lead you to do and to think? And if that's all we leave you with today, then we've succeeded. We've succeeded.
So thank you everybody for tuning in, and be looking for episode number 2, which we're going to do the chapter 1, The Muses Within. So make sure you do your homework. We're educators, we're teachers, so your homework is to read chapter 1.
That's right. And thank you all very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until next time, remember, we are all energy beings, and how we use our energy is our choice. But that is what defines us. As you bring in higher vibrational frequencies of love and gratitude, and Donna, you know this, laughter, then you literally uplift yourself. So let's have an uplifting day and week. And until next time, we will see you later. Bye.
Bye.